Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Rabble. This is a 5-cost action and attack card from Prosperity, and it says, plus 3 cards, each other player reveals the top 3 cards of their deck, discards the actions and treasures, and puts the rest back in any order they choose. So Rabble, I would say, is primarily a terminal draw card. So action card costs 5, draws you plus 3 cards. This is what we call a Smithy variant, and you see a lot of them throughout the expansions. It's a fairly typical card type, I would say. Now, Rabble doesn't just draw you the cards, it also has this minor attack, and that's what the rest of the text on the card is. I think the attack is minor enough that you're never really buying Rabble for the attack so much, as you really, anytime you consider Rabble, it's because what you actually want is a draw card. Now, I'd say that Rabble is probably one of the weaker Smithy variants. In general, Smithy variants are actually pretty good cards overall. Draw is very strong in Dominion, so this doesn't mean Rabble is bad or anything. However, a lot of the other cards that give you plus 3 cards have another bonus effect that tends to be better than what you get from Rabble, I would say. So Rabble is what I like to call a reliability attack. I guess technically it's a type of, what's the term used? Top deck mucker attack, I think, which is a very weird name, but I like to say that Rabble specifically is a attack on your opponent's reliability. So what it tries to do, essentially, is get unplayable victory and curse stop cards to the top of your deck. And this just makes it harder for you to draw, makes it more likely that you will dud, because you just have these bad cards that you got to try and push through before you can effectively draw the rest of your deck. You know how normally you want all the good cards, the villages, the smithies, to come first, and all the stop cards to come last in your draw order? This tries to reverse that to make it as difficult as possible to draw through your deck. Now, of course, this effect only really works if you actually have any such cards in your deck, and as we all know by now, normally you're trying to get rid of stuff like the estates as your highest priority for cards to trash. So sometimes you're just not going to have any victory cards or curses in your deck at all, and so Rabble isn't actually going to be top decking anything. So the attack only looks at the next 3 cards of your deck. It's not actually guaranteed to find any victory or curse cards, and this is sort of why the attack is minor. It attempts to try and do this little thing that hurts the reliability a little bit, but it's not even going to guarantee to succeed at doing it. Now, the more times you play Rabble, I'd say the better it gets, just because it churns through your deck more, hunting out these cards. So if you actually do have any of these cards in your deck, the more Rabbles get played, more likely it is that it's actually going to have some sort of effect. And of course, these stackable attacks, you can tend to expect that they hit you more often and earlier with higher player counts, so it gets a little bit stronger the more players that you have. But that's sort of true in general of a lot of attacks, really. Now, as cards get top-decked, further plays will search more slowly through the rest of your deck, because it will be always looking at the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you, of course, just top-decked 2 victory cards, the next play of Rabble, 2 of those 3 cards are going to be the victory cards that you just top-decked. So at that point, it's only churning 1 card through your deck at a time. So for that reason, probably a little bit random on whether or not it's actually going to find anything, just because as you do start to find them, it makes it harder to find more of them. So when playing against Rabble, because it doesn't like you to have victory cards in your deck, this means that it tends to push games a little bit more towards gaining victory cards a little bit later than usual. So there's just that little bit of extra time to build. Of course, the longer you go without any victory cards in your deck, the less you have to worry about Rabble's attack, because it's just a longer length of the game where it just won't really be doing anything. Now, of course, there are some strategies like Duke that want to get a lot of victory cards early and often, and of course Rabble is actually really effective against those, but you don't tend to see those sort of decks that much anyway. But it is definitely, if it was a borderline case for something like Duke, and then there was a Rabble engine that's sort of possible in the kingdom, but not a very good one, then it might actually hurt Duke enough that you wouldn't go down that route, basically. Now, at the moment, we've been talking about curse cards and victory cards being the thing that Rabble wants to find, but this is not the only cards out there that are neither actions nor treasure cards. Knight cards are actually functional cards that you want, that almost all of them are not actions or treasures. I think Werewolf is the only exception, basically, because it's an action card as well. So all of the other Knight cards will actually get top-decked by Rabble, and sometimes this is actually of benefit to your opponent. So some of them are quite strong, like Vampire, or maybe there's like Monastery, where they want to actually find those cards a lot quicker, earlier on, and play them more often, and Rabble will actually help them find them, get to those cards sooner. So do watch out for Knight cards, do make Rabble a little bit worse sometimes. Now, with all these sorts of types of attacks that are looking at the top of your deck, sometimes like everyone remembers that what they're doing is discarding all of these good cards off of their deck. So like if you have, I don't know, some particular card you want to be playing like Witch or whatever, and you see Rabble discard it, it tends to stick in your mind, and you just think, oh, you know, this is discarding this good card and making it miss the shuffle, and that's quite bad for me. But what you've got to remember is that Rabble, in this case, doesn't really discriminate, and if you have bad cards in your deck, like Coppers or Ruins, it's actually going to be discarding those too. And so, you know, it's very random as to whether it's actually going to discard anything good or not, and sort of over the long term of the game, this effect is sort of neutral. I mean, you can get unlucky or you can get very lucky either way. You know, it is random. It is a card game. But I would say that, you know, if you are seeing like good cards being discarded by Rabble, don't fool yourself into thinking that this is actually like causing you serious damage, because in reality it's not, like, because you will not really be thinking about the fact that it's pushing you past all of these coppers that you didn't want to draw and so on. So yeah, so don't worry about it, basically. Sort of along these same lines, because Rabble is hunting through your deck essentially and discarding stuff, this is cycling you through your shuffle. Now, as a general rule, cycling through your shuffle, getting to the end of your shuffle quicker, is generally considered a good thing for you. And that is because, of course, as you are adding cards to your deck, as you get closer to the shuffle, well, basically when you shuffle, that is your chance to now have a go at playing with those cards. So the quicker you get to your shuffle, the sooner you get to play with the newer, hopefully stronger cards that you're adding to your deck. And so that just sort of gives you a little bit of a speed boost if you can cycle through your deck sooner. Now, the thing with Rabble is that, of course, it might also discard those cards as well. Like, just because it's cycled you quicker to the shuffle doesn't mean you're actually going to be able to play with those cards next shuffle. As you know, it is all fairly random. And so, while there is this little bit of a dampening of the effectiveness of Rabble's attack by giving your opponent better cycling, I would say overall it's probably not really anything to worry about, like the discarding. It's sort of neutral for you overall because, again, super random. You'll just be having confirmation bias probably, where you're thinking of all the times where, like, it might be useful for you without considering all of the times where actually, you know, it's sort of hurting you as well. So don't focus too much on this part of Rabble either, I would say, in my experience. Now, something that's a little bit more subtle about Rabble is that it makes it a lot harder to achieve clean shuffles. So especially if people are playing multiple Rabbles against you, which they actually can do because it's a terminal draw card and you tend to play multiple copies of those, Rabble can actually shove quite a lot of cards into your discard pile. And that can matter when you come to shuffle, like mid-turn, because sometimes you have cards like Warehouse where you are deliberately also throwing your worst cards into your discard pile as well. So if you have something like, say, Warehouse, what you might do is, like, say you had one Warehouse and the aim was going to be that you used it to discard ideally like 3 estates on your turn or something. So you can, you know, push past them because maybe you don't have a good way to trash them, and this way you don't have to, like, invest too much in drawing past them, which can be more difficult. But if you have a load of good cards in your shuffle, then you might get toward the end of your shuffle, and normally, because your discard only contained like estates, you might think to yourself, well, maybe I just won't bother drawing those last 3 cards. I'm not going to trigger a shuffle and potentially just shuffle like 2 estates into my deck or 3 estates or whatever. I'll just not draw. But if you've got a load of good cards in there, this could be a problem because maybe you really want to play some of those cards, but if you want to actually get at those cards, you have to trigger the entire shuffle, including all of the bad cards that you've just put in your discard with Warehouse, and this makes it a bit more complicated. It means it's a lot harder to get away with not drawing as well when you're using something like Warehouse alongside Rabble, because can you actually risk triggering the shuffle mid-turn? Normally you would just not bother, but now there's a real reason why you might want to shuffle mid-turn. And with that, you might not get all the way through your deck, and you set up a shuffle, a new draw pile, essentially with a bunch of bad cards in it, and that can also cause you to dud. And so this is another way in which Rabble's kind of like a reliability attack. When you play with these sorts of cards, makes it easier for you to sort of cause a situation where you might dud yourself. So just take a little bit of care around this. Having all of your good cards put in your discard pile can make sifters or filterers, or whatever you call them, like Warehouse and Cellar, a bit more difficult to use. So, once Rabble starts top-decking multiple cards, what Rabble lets the victim do is essentially choose the order that they go back on top. So if they start top-decking like curses and provinces at the same time, they get to choose which ones go in which position. Now, you may be able to take advantage of this sometimes. So an example could be that if you've top-decked 2 cards, you know what the second card of your deck is. So something like Wishing Well, you can actually guess correctly because you've basically decided which card is going in the second position, so you should be able to guess and draw that extra card more easily. Of course, while we talk about things like Wishing Well, getting to take advantage of this, it is also worth noting that some cards will actually be negatively impacted by this as well. So an example is if you have Herald in your starting hand, and you really want an action card to be your second card of your draw pile, that's no good if Rabble has top-decked 2 victory cards or 2 curses, because it's guaranteed to fail in that case. And sometimes that's another way in which Rabble, will now cause you to dud, because you were reliant on finding something good with Herald because your hand wasn't great, and now there's no chance of that happening at all. So it does really depend a lot on the rest of the kingdom, so it's hard to generalise this, but, for good and bad reasons, you may be able to take advantage of the top decking, but it also may just, completely KO certain other cards, at least at the start of your turn. Obviously, once you've drawn past these cards, it's top decked, and it's not impacting that anymore. So Rabble can synergize with some other attacks. An obvious synergy should be cursing attacks, because they put curses in your opponent's deck, and Rabble will then top deck the curses, and it cycles them through and leaves the curses on top, so they actually draw the curses a little more often, and that's better for your junking attack, right? The curses become more impactful when Rabble is around. And another one I'm going to specifically call out is Barbarian from Allies, a fairly new card. With Rabble, it makes it very easy for Barbarian to actually hit the victory cards, which are sometimes one of the main targets you're looking to hit with Barbarian. If you can put their provinces on top and then play Barbarian, guaranteed to smack it, right? And destroy their province, which is very brutal sometimes with Barbarian. So Rabble and Barbarian sort of a very strong synergy sometimes in this case. Of course, as much as it can synergize with attacks, Rabble can also anti-synergize as well. So a lot of other decks that care about the top card of their deck, such as Bandit and Knight, the thing is that normally you are going to be playing these attacks after you've been doing all the drawing. Because Rabble is a terminal draw card, you tend to want to play it early in your turn. So before you start playing your other attacks, it's going to have a chance to top deck provinces. And then when you play Bandit, you're not going to find treasures anymore, because it's just going to find these provinces that you've put on top. And then it's going to discard past them. So it actively, gets It actively undoes, the whole point of the Rabble, which was to put the victory cards on top. It then just discards them out the way harmlessly. So that's bad, right, for you, the Rabble player, because it guarantees the bandit will miss, and it also means it guarantees the Rabble doesn't do anything. Swindler in particular, sort of similar to Barbarian, this one actually can get hurt quite a lot by Rabble, because there are certain cards that Swindler, when you hit them, they're not as good. With Swindler, what you really want to be doing is hitting their good playable cards, like, their Rabbles, for example, their villages, and so on. Slightly in contrast to Rabble, which sort of wants to hit the victory cards sometimes. Swindler specifically doesn't want to hit those cards. And what they can do with Swindler is they can put the curses, they can put the provinces on top of their deck, and then, because they get to choose the order if it finds multiple, and then Swindler will hit the curse and will uselessly turn it into another curse, or even worse, you might have to change it back into a copper and actually give your opponent a point that way. So, these are, of course, top deck attacks, but you need to consider all of the top deck attacks that are also in the Kingdom with Rabble and say, does the top deck attack actually get worse as a result of Rabble specifying what goes on top of the opponent's deck before you get a chance to use the attack? So there are a bunch of other interactions as well. This is a little bit of lists of cards with examples, but I just thought I'd go through a bunch because there's not really that much more to say about Rabble, really. Because Rabble puts a lot of potentially good cards in the discard pile. There's a couple of cards here: Harbinger, Mountain Village, Courier, March. These sort of get to take advantage of good cards being in the discard pile. So if you get to play these after your opponent has played a Rabble, sometimes that's really good. If you have Mountain Villages in your hand at the start of your turn and your opponent has Rabbled away a bunch of good cards like other Rabbles or other villages, you just get to take them out of the discard pile. Guide and Desert Guides, these are two cards that try and improve your reliability, and ironically you'd think they'd be good against what I call a reliability attack here, but actually Rabble potentially makes these cards a little bit harder to use. So the thing with stuff like Guide is that if you don't like your opening hand on a turn, you get to just throw it away, basically discard the whole thing and draw a new hand of 5 cards. And Desert Guides is the same thing, but with favours from the Allies expansion. Problem is that if you have 3 victory cards on top of your deck, then you might a lot of the time be looking at your hand and thinking, well, actually, maybe I have just a smithy and no village in this turn, but if I discarded it and swapped it for the hand I'm going to get from Guide, could actually be worse, because you're only going to have 2 playable cards in it. And so, sure, you can use Guide or Desert Guides twice in one turn, but it does mean that the first one is potentially actually going to be a worse hand, and therefore you have to invest a little bit more in Guides to get more copies in order to make it work. So this is just a little one, but it is important to note. Village Green is a very important card with Rabble because it's very, very easy to activate. If your opponent is constantly playing Rabbles, discarding through your deck and churning through it, Village Green's very easy to find, lots of opportunities to find it and react it. It is worth noting that Tunnel is another classic discard reaction that actually specifically does not work with Rabble, and that is because Tunnel is otherwise an unplayable victory card, so Rabble will top deck it rather than discard it. So don't be fooled by Tunnel. It's actually bad to have tunnels in your deck with Rabble, even though Rabble says it discards cards. And lastly, Soldier. This card specifically likes engine pieces that are attacks that you're going to play multiple copies of because it generates more money, and Rabble is one of those. So in summary, these sort of interactions that I've just shown you, I wouldn't say that the presence of them is something that pushes me a lot more heavily towards Rabble, or even necessarily against it, because Rabble, the reason why I actually want it, is because it's a draw card, and even if there's Village Green and your opponent's going to get a bunch, that's normally, triggering those is still going to be better than not drawing your deck a lot of the time. You're still better off doing the engine, even if you're enabling their Village Greens. The attack's pretty mild, and sometimes it's hard to really quantify what it's actually doing for you. How good is the Rabble attack? It's hard to say sometimes. It sort of has this effect, but, how much impact is it really having on the game? Because it is very random sometimes. And overall, it's supposed to be negative for your opponent. And it is, but, how negative is it? It's hard, because some of the effects that it has, the cycling and so on, sort of dampen that to the point where you're not really sure really what sort of bad impact it's having anymore. I would say that Rabble is a slightly below average card, and the rankings agree with me there. It is just a little bit below the middle of the pack. Draw cards are very good, which is why even a very weak form of attack isn't enough to drag this card down. I would say that this is, however, a lower priority than many Smithy variants. Sometimes there are other Smithy variants that you don't necessarily want that many copies of, and it's fine to then invest later draw cards as Rabbles. Like, if you weren't using the benefit of the other Smithy variant after, like, the first one, you might as well pick up Rabble. But generally, the other terminal draw cards are just going to get picked over Rabble instead. So that's all I really have to say about Rabble. So what we're going to do now is we're going to head over to the online client, and I'm going to generate some random kingdoms with the Rabble in it. And we're going to see how impactful it is on these kingdoms. So this does not have Colony Platinum. And what do we have? We have 3 types of village. We've got Village, Fishing Village, and King's Court, that are all excellent villages. And we've got Smithy and Rabble. So we do have a direct competition with Rabble. Because there's King's Court, you actually get to play Rabble a lot, and that's pretty good. There is a Junker with Sea Hag. The only trashing is Bishop, which is really bad as a trasher, but, there is King's Court, so you will get thin, I suppose. So it's actually fine. Of course, Sea Hag can give your opponent a lot of curses quickly, and you can top deck them all with Rabble. So actually, I think at some point we will still do the Sea Hag thing. So I think there's nothing here that specifically pushes me towards Smithy over Rabble, except for the fact that, obviously, if I can only afford to get terminal draw by taking advantage of Smithy's cost reduction, then I'll just take Smithy instead, right? It should be clear here that there's a very nice engine. You've got Horde to gain golds that can then be bishoped as well. There's even peddlers. Is there any plus buy? Ooh, no, there's not. Horde is the only way to gain extra cards in this game. So actually, Horde's going to be pretty important, and you do get to bishop them as well later, potentially, because you are going to have a bishop and get thin, because there's a good King's Court engine here, and it can actually choose, if it's falling behind, it can choose to not take provinces. I guess it can gain, like, duchies or estates and gain golds, potentially multiple, maybe have multiple hordes if your deck gets really good, and you can start bishoping them and catch up. So, yeah, I think that maybe Peddler's bad here because there's no plus buy, but it sure would be nice to peddle some, to bishop some peddlers, excuse me. But, Rabble, I think here whether you get it or not is mainly a matter of circumstance over Smithy, really. If you can afford the Rabble, then for sure you take it over Smithy because, outside of the cost of gaining, Smithy isn't doing anything for you. And the attack's okay here. You've got Sea Hag. So Rabble is fine on this board. You're almost certainly getting it unless it just so happens that Smithy's lower cost is actually better in all cases. Again, there is no Colony Platinum in this kingdom, so we've got Village again, basic Village. That's good. That means we've got a classic draw engine, and the only other way of drawing here is Wishing Well. So I'm certainly going to be going for Rabble. I do note that the only trashing is Transmute, which is very bad, and your opponent's pirate ships, which is also very bad. This is not the board to get pirate ship at all. It's just awful here. We do have Quarry, which makes it easier to get Artisan. We've got Ironworks to get Village. So even though the trashing is bad, we actually can gain a lot of Rabbles and Villages between Ironworks and Artisan. And there's also Wishing Well to get with Ironworks that maybe helps you draw as well. But of course, what's the actual goal of drawing your deck here? Is it really to just play Artisan a bunch? You see, you can build this engine, but how does that fare against something like big money? Well, I think actually Rabble hurts a basic big money strategy a bit. If your opponent wants to play pirate ship against you, you are very lucky. You can actually get treasure maps through Ironworks and Artisan and actually potentially collide them suddenly in one turn and just stock up on golds if you need them. Like, there's no point in pirate shipping. You're just so lucky if your opponent picks it to get rid of your coppers, because the coppers are really bad here. And you sort of can't transmute, right, to do that either, because it's just getting you transmutes, which are very bad and you don't want them and you can't get rid of them. So I suppose there is the argument, you can transmute away the estate to get golds, which is better under a Rabble onslaught, but, it's so slow to get it. And is there any plus buy? No, but, you can Ironworks or Artisan a potion. There's just no plus buy. Maybe that's actually okay, because you get so many action cards, you can transmute duchies. Is this deck's lack of plus buy so significant that I actually want transmute to get duchies? Probably not, because you got Artisan to get duchies with, actually. No, I don't have to get rid of my precious victory card, my action cards, to do that. So no, I think I don't bother with transmute, and I'm okay with just estates being top decked, I guess, because there's Wishing Well, right? So it doesn't even hurt that much. If I have a Wishing Well in hand and they top deck 2 estates, it's fine. I get to draw one of them. One of them doesn't count. So Rabble, you get it because it's the only draw here. The attack is fine, really. But yeah, so it's fine on this board, really, Rabble, I would say. You sort of build the engine anyway, I think. In fact, I think Rabble's good because it makes you build the engine. It stops alternate strategies. So now we do have Colony and Platinum here. And what is this kingdom? So straight away I notice there is no villages at all. We do have Warehouse, Conspirator, Upgrade as things that work with Conspirator. We have got Lurker, but I don't like a Lurker here. We only have one terminal that we can play, and that's almost certainly going to be Militia, probably. Because where's the draw on this board? Well, it's only Rabble, which is terminal in the face of no village. So what we really want to be doing is... Now, you see, because you're getting militiaed, it's quite hard to kick off Conspirators with Warehouse, thinking about it. That's actually quite bad. So what do we do? Is the board weak enough that Counting House is a consideration? Talisman's very bad here, we're not doing that. But because there's a discard attack as well, surely you playing Counting House is not better than you playing Militia on an opponent, right? That's got to be the best thing, because if you don't do that, they get to build a Warehouse Upgrade Conspirator sort of deck thing, which is very good for them. Although that's really hard to kick off, thinking about it. In fact, no, that's sort of impossible to kick off if you're playing Militia, because you sort of have to start it with either Upgrade or Warehouse or Lurker, and they all reduce your hand size. I actually think the Conspirator engine is not viable here, thinking about it, which means what's left? Bandit, big money, Militia, big money. Do you have Bandit, Militia, and Mine as cards in your deck, or maybe a Rabble? And you're just sort of going Militia and Rabble like a big money thing? Probably. Maybe that's what you do. Maybe Rabble is fine. I guess you'd have an upgrade as well to get rid of the coppers, and maybe you still do that. Maybe you don't. I don't know. The upgrade's fine, isn't it? Well, it's not, because you're getting discard attacked as well. So, But, man, you wouldn't have Mine, right? So... Bandit is also bad. Man, what do you do on this board? Anyway, I can see that you probably don't even get Rabble. You sort of play this one by ear, you guess. You sort of go for a non-engine that's just hit by Militia. Maybe you just buy a lot of Militias. This is the sort of thing where the AI on the Templegate Games app, Hard AI, might just buy 6 Militias or something. And, well, that sure shows me, it's probably what you do here, actually. You just, buy a lot of Militias, and you just trying to play them every turn. I guess so. So I think maybe we skip Rabble on that board. There's no engine, really. It's an engine card, first and foremost. This is another Colony. Oh, right, the last game was Colony Platinum as well, wasn't it? Ugh. Maybe mine was better in that case. Ha. Anyway, here's another Colony Platinum game. We have Chapel that I noticed straight away. We do have a village, but it's Shantytown, but that's okay because there's Wharf, the best draw card in the game. And there's also Watchtower, which is draw to X. Well, Watchtower doesn't really like Wharf. We've got Smugglers too, which is actually pretty good. So what's this? Shantytown Wharf draw engine? There's Ironworks to get Shantytowns and maybe some Watchtowers as well. It gets you Merchants, which is also pretty good. We could have 1 silver with Ironworks. So this is a Wharf engine, yeah, with Ironworks. And Rabble we probably don't bother with. I mean, there's Chapel, you just trash, and really you want Wharves instead. I would say you only get Rabble when you have run out of Wharves, and you're not going to be using Watchtower because you've got enough Wharves. I suppose that Watchtower isn't really going to make up the difference. I guess Watchtower's not very good here, thinking about it. Well, maybe you get 1. So yeah, so Rabble probably skipped because Wharf is better, I would say there. But you might get some late. But Wharf is such a higher priority on that board. And here comes the last one. This is not a colony game. The last one was, so you were certainly building the Wharf engine. So what do we got here? This is up to province. So we have Trading Post for trashing. We have, what do we have for draw? Well, there's like Tactician, there's Library, there's Ghost Ship, there's Rabble. Is Double Tactician good here? Well, you've got Bazaar, you've got Mill, you've got Cut Purse. You can play those. Bazaar is also a village, so you actually want quite a lot of villages. So I think we've got a Double Tactician deck here. The only problem with this is that Trading Post is the trashing, which is actually not great for Tactician deck. So the other alternative, of course, is that you just do like Bazaar, Rabble, and Ghost Ship, and you don't bother with Tactician because you are going to have a bunch of silvers with Trading Post, and that's actually better than Tactician. The only problem is the only buy is Tactician, and that extra buy is actually going to be quite useful here. Getting 1 card per turn is really going to stink, especially under the influence of Ghost Ship deck. Yeah, so I think we do the Double Tactician because it gives us the plus buy, and yeah, we don't get the silvers with Trading Post. We don't get to play them really, but whatever. We probably even have Cut Purses just for the money, like we don't really care about the attack. But we certainly want to play Ghost Ship. I guess the question is how many Rabbles would we play per turn? Probably not that many. Do we bother with Rabble? Probably not. Like, a Tactician and a Ghost Ship is probably good enough draw for our deck, really? You know, how much better does it need to be? Well, you know, you have got Mill for money, and you can draw with Rabble. If you can get a bunch of Mills for points, you know, maybe you are better off with some Rabbles rather than, like, playing Cut Purse. Like, I don't know, you play Rabbles and then you discard the cards you draw with Mill? Maybe. Right, like you could do that. It's probably nicer than Cut Purse, but it's a lot more roundabout, I guess. Maybe it's more consistent. Maybe you do that. Anyway, Rabble doesn't seem high priority here, especially under the Ghost Ship and Tactician. Library, you just don't play with at all. There's no way. Having said that, you know, it certainly does undo the Ghost Ship attack, doesn't it? But and the Ghost Ship attack isn't going to do that much against like a Double Tactician player, I guess, but it still does something. So, you know, that's the other argument, isn't it? It's Trading Post Library with a sort of a more money-centric strategy, but surely Ghost Ship's got to do bad, got to, like, hurt that quite a lot, you know? They will have a bunch of turns of doing nothing. There is Warehouse, which is actually fine for that Tactician deck, thinking about it. Like, so maybe you do want to do that. So Rabble's only okay here, I would say. So looking at those 5 kingdoms, I mean, the time that you didn't get Rabble tended to be when there was better draw, basically. And that's to be expected. You know, how good was the attack in a lot of these kingdoms? We didn't even consider it in a bunch. Like, just thinking about it, I didn't even mention how good the attack was sometimes because, you know, whatever, really, sometimes its attack's not really doing that much. I mean, here, yeah, eventually you start picking up provinces, and sure, that's not great, but, you know, you have got, like, Mill to discard, so, like, get money for them, so it's not even that huge of a deal. You know, Tactician draws them up shoots past them at the start of your turn anyway, so it doesn't even hurt your reliability that much. You just get a load of extra draw at the start of your turn. So yeah, whatever. Anyway, that was Rabble. I hope that was useful for you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.